All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Welcome. Uh, the title of the session is very clearly here. So if you meant to be elsewhere, this doesn't suddenly become a different session. It is the session that it's supposed to be. Thanks for your patience for a couple minutes. We've been doing tech different things. Our in-person is joined by people who are watching live stream as well. So that's a fun part of getting all that organized. But thanks to our tech team and then the AFMC team for getting that all together. So welcome everyone to the session. I hope you're enjoying ICAM. And I really appreciate you being here after lunch and when the weather is that nice outside. I gave you permission after our session to go outside. My name is Victor. I'm a pediatrician at the University of Alberta, and I co-chair the Culture of Academic Medicine Initiative, which oversees work implementing the Okanagan Charter at our 18 faculties of medicine. And I get a chance to host sessions like this, where I invite my friends to talk about stuff that I am interested in, and everyone else gets to grill them, and I just say, if you have questions, answer them and whatnot. So we'll go through some background, logistics, and different pieces, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So, firstly, we'll start off the more formal part of our conversation, acknowledging that we're hosting this meeting on the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And to center this work, not to just do a territorial or land acknowledgement, but recognize as part of our conversation about trust, AI, and well-being, that we always need to think about the implications of this work for Indigenous patients, Indigenous folks in medicine, otherwise. This week being here, I've been really trying to learn more about the land locally. And I became aware that there's an Indigenous kind of land walking tour that happens in Ottawa, where they take you on a kind of 3 kilometer loop and tell you more about different landmarks and their importance to Indigenous history. And I've been an Edmontonian almost my whole life. And still, there are many landmarks where I'm surprised to learn about their importance to Indigenous folks. So that's one way that I think we can think about that work. And certainly in our reflection conversation today, I think there will be much for us to think about how our work can continue to advance Indigenous reconciliation. So these sessions are accredited. Therefore, we have a group of people who make sure the sessions are legit and not just me making up some random objectives. So these are the folks who help decide what we're going to do. And this session and the Culture of Academic Medicine Initiative does receive financial support from CMA, MD Financial, and Scotiabank as part of their affinity funds. So the Culture of Academic Medicine Initiative does receive support from them. So huge thanks for that and the ability to do this type of work. So now I can finally introduce our speakers, my friends, and then we can get into the conversation. So like I said, I'm Victor. I'm a pediatrician in Edmonton, and I get to chair this initiative. And I'm going to host the session alongside Dr. Jerry Maniat and Dr. Lynn Sonnenberg. So I can't really introduce them without taking the whole hour because they've accomplished so much. But firstly, I'll start with Dr. Maniat, who's Executive Director of Equity and Health Systems Group. He's an internist here in Ottawa. And Jerry, I'll let you just kind of give people a little bit more rundown of who you are and
Sure.
your conflicts are up on the slide there. So just again for declarations.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Victor. And it's great to see so many out and certainly friends and faces are familiar as well. I think things that ground me in terms of the topic of well-being include the fact that I am a husband and father of 2 young girls. And so they give me the energy to, well, they sometimes give me the energy, but maybe not. But it gives me the reason to do what I do, as well as care for my parents and my family as well. I'm also the vice chair in the Department of Medicine for member support. And so it's been a real joy to be in that kind of space where I'm thinking about how do we create spaces where people can thrive, not just survive, how we can help them flourish in the work that they do, and what role do we have as a department to play in that space. So I get to bring the theory down into the real muddy, messy kind of places. And for me, that brings joy, especially if we can find small things that can help move the conversation forward.
Fantastic. And then I have the pleasure also of being up here with Dr. Lynn Sonnenberg, who's been my mentor since second year med school. She's currently also with Equity and Health Systems, but a professor emeritus at the University of Alberta. So, Lynn, do you want to just say hi to everyone and welcome?
I would love to. My whole sort of joie de vie is leaving places a little bit better than I found them and learning more about myself in the journey so that I can better turn and help others. To be able to use the privilege that I have been granted for the spaces that I have been allowed to participate in, again, to stand beside some and to amplify their messages. I have learned how to get dirty, how to rumble, how to have hard conversations, how to admit that I'm wrong, how to learn, unlearn, and relearn in a space that's ever evolving. And I've learned that well being has to be woven into everything we do. It is the foundation and it is my ultimate bias.
Thanks. I don't know if I signed up to get my shirt dirty, but I guess I don't know if anyone else did either, but maybe we're doing that. Okay, so the general format of this is that we've done our kind of intros. It's not really a presentation. We're going to have a dialogue and conversation, and I'll try to keep it not too long because I could talk to Jerry and Lynn about different things all day. But we're going to try to engage both our virtual audience and our in-person audience for questions, and then try to wrap up some takeaways. So from a general purpose, both for the online folks and then here, there's a recording of the session going on because people watch this after, and it's for CPD credits and those type of things. So for in-person, there are microphones up at the front that we'll use when we're into the Q&A part. And then for our virtual folks who are on our Zoom function, there's a Q&A part that I'm going to monitor. And so we will use both when we're trying to have conversation. And again, the space here is for us to have a shared conversation. So I think it's important for us to together create an accountable space where we can ask questions and rumble through the different concepts, as Lynn said, and try to be here to learn about different things, but recognize that everyone's coming from different perspectives and knowledge in all these spaces, and personal experiences. So for comments, questions-wise, chat-wise, to always be thoughtful about that. Okay, and so at the end of this, Jerry and Lynn will have solved these objectives here. And hopefully then all of you will be informed in all this stuff and be able to just, deal and address with all of them. But we have a few small questions that we're trying to encounter and deal with, which is really trying to look at the intersection of in the implementation of AI, where we've had a lot of conversation at this conference and otherwise about all the implications of that. What about things like trust and well-being and psychological safety and the environment, right? So we've been talking lots about how when we're thinking about well-being and health promoting environments, this is not just about, yoga sessions or things like that. We have to think about how everything impacts well-being. And I wonder how all of us have thought about the implementation of AI and its impact on well-being. I think sometimes it's been seen as potentially positive in things like administrative burden, right? AI is supposed to be able to help us do certain things. Like most things, though, I wonder if something's easier to do, do we just add and do more work and, more and more and more and more? I don't know, maybe. And then what about some of the things that are inherent to our discussions around humanism and medicine and how does it affect trust and different pieces? So that's how these objectives are built. We'll see where our conversation goes around all of that and then engage everyone in those pieces. So just to open up and start, I'll ask Jerry and Lynn maybe for some opening comments and thoughts around, as you've explored use of AI in your different environments, and both of you actually do lots of work around, effective implementation of AI. When people say, how does implementation of AI affect trust? And how that maybe relates to safety and well-being. What comes to mind to you? What are some things that you want people to think about?
It's a great question to start off with. And I think the starting point that I often think about is where are people actually starting off in this conversation? We've got a wide spectrum of individuals who have differing views of technology and AI. We have people who are full embracing, they are modernizing how they do things in all aspects of life, not just having Siri and Alexa at home, but other tools and resources to impact how they do their day-to-day professional and personal lives. But then you also have the other extreme of people who are, frankly, not just afraid of, but completely distrust everything to be said about this conversation. And then you have everyone else in the middle, right? Who are sort of like, yeah, I use Google Maps to get here, or, I can get some recommendations for restaurants, but, I'm not too sure how it's going to impact my career and my work. It might, it will, and they wrestle in that kind of space. But underpinning this is this inherent question of trust. Where do they start off? Are they in a space where they trust the things that are out there? Or is there a degree of mistrust about those things, or distrust? Right? And those are a bit of a spectrum, right? And how that is in their lives impacts how they view these interventions, these methodologies, these technologies that exist. And every single issue that they wrestle with is usually layered in that foundational piece. And so I see this as just the next thing for those kind of conversations. But if you unwrap it or sort of boil it back down to the base level, there's this question of trust.
And I think to build off of that, Jerry, we've been doing work with David Wilder's group with the Future Skills Canada grant, and there was a charter for accountable use of AI in Canadian healthcare, which was co-designed with patients and caregivers. And within those conversations, it came down to the main pillar we need to be looking at with our patients is trust. And it breaks down into 3 specifics. The first was that accountability of just talking about sharing how we are using technology, how we are getting to the conclusions we get to. And the second is access. Who has access to the technology? Who's able to bring it into their spaces? Are we creating another tiered system as we move forward? And then again, transparency. So not just how we're getting to our answers or what we're doing, but how are we using that information? Where is it being stored? How is it entering into the conversation? And while we were part of those discussions, I was taken aback by, as a clinician, I wouldn't have thought of saying any of those things to my patients in a conversation around AI. I just would assume that would be part of what the clinical encounter was, not recognizing that in that conversation, I was eroding that trust relationship that we had built up. And I think that had led us at the same time to start working on a practical framework. So coming out of the dean's office in educational innovation and technology, that's what I loved. I love the technology piece. I love being on that curve. I love being way off, knowing what's coming and recognizing we need to build a plan about how we're bringing everyone along with us. And so we do have a slide in our deck which speaks to the CARE AI framework, or Healthcare AI framework, that we put together. There's a QR code there for those that are joining online. You can scan, or you can go to our website, EQHS, Equity and Health Systems.ca/care-AI, like our framework. And within there, we have 10 principles. And they break down into those 4 domains that you see. And the first is around shared values. That shared responsibility in the conversation, and not just with our patients, but with our students and with our institutions. So oftentimes from a well-being perspective, we hear about, well, it's my personal resilience. It's I need to do all of these things. And when we looked at this international Delphi, we heard about, with respect to artificial intelligence, this is not just my responsibility as an individual physician, that our institutions actually have to be showing up as well and providing guidance, providing resources, helping us make those decisions along the way. And that was striking to me because I hadn't really recognized the response, that it is a shared responsibility, and that we do need the same values that came up at the same time with our patient partners were reflected by clinicians, our researchers, our educators. Honesty, integrity, transparency, those same 3 pieces coming through. There's also an element of competence. How are we using artificial intelligence in this space? There needs to be a certain amount of literacy, understanding. So when I speak to artificial intelligence, am I speaking about generative AI? Am I speaking about, ChatGPT, Claude, or name your favorite sort of chatbot that you're working through? Or am I talking about machine learning, looking in the backgrounds when it comes to our route planning, or predicting which patients are going to need more assistance in day-to-day clinical encounters? And that brings us to this concern that I think we have around human judgment. It's sort of, where is the human still in this loop that we're talking about? How am I still accountable for this learning? And I know we're going to unpack this later with learners. And then my ability to critically think through things. The same way I do in a differential, I also need to critically think about what AI outputs are putting out. And while there is this shortcut that I can take, that shortcut has consequences to how I feel and eventually to our well-being. And I know I can't wait to unpack that one. To finish up sort of within the framework, we have two other areas. One is accountability, talks about the legal compliance, the privacy and consent. And a lot of that has to do with the institutions, but our awareness in that space. And finally, what drives what Jerry and I do is that equity, the bias reduction that we need to be looking at. We're already working with a limited data set, and it's just drawing on the biases that are already present. So we then need to be looking at equity in design right from the beginning. And finally, in our conversations like the ones we're having today, we've recognized that sustainability needs to be a factor. We need to look at our environmental impact. We need to look at the financial impact. We need to look at all of those other things that as we're going through, how are we keeping current and up to speed? And as I say all of those things, there is this general sense of overwhelm. And we're like, well, isn't AI supposed to make my life easier? Isn't it supposed to be me as a human having more time to do human things? And now you just dropped this down on me at the same time. That sounds like more work, not less work. And so that's why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lynn and Jerry, and thanks for this framework. That's one of the reasons we wanted to bring you into the conversation. I could pick up on a million different pieces, but I think, the session or the title of this series is called Wellbeing Matters. So maybe I'll delve first into the well-being piece a little bit more. And so the Culture of Academic Medicine Initiative, for those who are still new to our work, looks at implementation of the Okanagan Charter, which has 6 strategic directions in our faculties of medicine. So we talk about things like, how do policies impact well-being? How do the spaces, physical, virtual, and otherwise, impact? How are we thinking about our culture and the communities that we're in? Are we looking at personal development? Are we thinking about how we measure and evaluate things? And then what faculty services are we providing? And I think I couldn't help, Lynn, but as you were listing the CARE AI framework pieces and the stuff that you were thinking about around implications for well-being, the kind of overlap there of how we can use a framework like the Okanagan Charter, which is thinking about trying to embed well-being in everything that we do, and how that overlaps with some of the pieces around, say, AI implementation. So could you both comment a little bit on how you think that, again, using some of these other frameworks that are happening, how we can look at implementation of AI in a way that supports well-being versus, to your point, adds this whole new conundrum of information overload, work overload, task overload, and those pieces?
So Lynn and I were like,
It's like, do you want to start? And I'm like, no. I've learned, I've been taught over time that it's okay to say no. That's part of my well-being, right?
So it's an interesting dilemma, because oftentimes people will focus in on one framework and say no other framework can work. But I think, as you're pointing out, Victor, there's an opportunity to bring these two spaces, which one's focusing on the health promoting campuses work that was the genesis of Okanagan Charter, and how we've conceptualized it within faculties of medicine, thinking about the unique work and learning environment that we find ourselves in, the messy space that I was talking about earlier, in which you got actually different people who are responsible, so many different layers of learners and faculty and preceptors from so many different spaces and programs. They're all co-locating and sort of working together actually to provide patient care. Oftentimes, right? That's the primary reason why they're in these messy spaces. Notwithstanding what we see in the classroom, but like moving out into the clinical experiential learning spaces. And so in that space, having a technology like AI or machine learning, all these other resources that are being developed and put in place, they're being put in place for specific reasons, right? And they're being put in place often in the context that I work at the Ottawa Hospital. People are thinking about, okay, this is going to help with AI scribes to help us with documentation, provide better, improved time for physicians to spend more time with their patient, less time doing the documentation. So that's a good thing. That's going to help with their well-being. But what implications does this have, right? So what implications does this have on the learner? Are they ready to use these type of resources? Should they be using these resources at this point when they're still formative in those early days, trying to understand who they are as a nurse, a physician, a pharmacist, et cetera? These are the challenges that exist in that kind of space. Now, as a faculty, as you're using this, are you actually gaining time for well-being? Or as we're seeing now in the literature, you're gaining more time just to see more patients, which is not actually solving the well-being problem, which oftentimes it's being purported to help with. So just like a lot of things, technologies may have one purpose, but then they have a secondary outcome that actually becomes a primary outcome, right? So, the car was a great technology that was brought into place, right? Who hasn't used a car lately, right? Back in the day, it was walking or horses or other modes of transportation. So the car allowed us to do things quicker and faster. Have we gained more time as a result? We seem to be busier than ever before. Electricity, same thing. Running water, all these things were vast improvements on our lives, but yet it has created time, but then that time has been taken away to actually do other work, not actually more rest or well-being time, focus on the things that actually give us joy and energy and contentment and satisfaction. So this is the dilemma when we think about these things. How do we then bring like an Okanagan Charter principled sort of approach to this work? Well, what kind of constraints are we going to think about? Is it constraints? Is it principles, rules of engagement of bringing these things into our learning environments? Are there specific parameters on when people should be using these things? Should we be okay with pajama time, which is a term in the literature referring to people charting at home in their pajamas? Back in the day, you had to be actually with a chart, and so you had to do it at work. Now the work follows you home, and there may be trade-offs. There may be reasons why people do this, but oftentimes it's not for it cumulatively becomes for the wrong reasons and then does impact health. Again, the technology is good, but it has a slippery slope if the constraints are not placed on how you're going to use it. And the Okanagan Charter may help us frame this in a more of a well-being, health-promoting kind of way.
And for me, I'm all about the practical. I love the academic conversations, but I'm like, give me the toolkit, give me the implementation guide, just tell me how to do it. In my context, let me take your content and apply it. And so we did that. We set out with those that have expertise from the technology perspective, those that have the professionalism and ethics perspective, and those that have the equity perspectives as well. We brought those three groups together with patient partners infused throughout, and in addition, on top of that, to make sure that we are continuing to keep the patient at the center of the conversation. And the learners, I want to say too, also within those groups leading the spaces. And so the same link that brought you to the framework also brings you to the implementation guide and toolkit. It's now in its second iteration. We're about to include additional patient partner information in that, as well as the equity lens, an additional look at that. So there's still some more iterations coming. They will be updated to that particular site. The part for me was I seemed to see academia in four settings. We've got the educators out there. Just show me a light wave. Ooh. Hello, great. So a few. We've got the administrators. You can vote more than one time. Administrators, great. We've got researchers. You notice I'm raising my hand for everything. Yes, and the clinicians. Do we have clinicians in the room too, right? And so those seem to be sort of four main contexts where we're seeing AI need to be embedded in. They're changing our focus in this space. And so if we can have, all right, tell me how this needs to overlay, tell me how I need to roll it out, what are the questions I should be thinking about it, how can I be delivering it within each of these contexts, that would be helpful. We heard that from groups, and so we did put that together. And so more help on that, feel free to contact us afterwards or follow through in that space. The other part that when I look at AI, my goal is to use AI in ways that reinforce, not weaken my identity as a fill in the blank clinician, educator, student, learner, researcher, etc. And I feel that oftentimes we think that AI is a shortcut. And so about a year ago, I decided to take up endurance athletics. And so I wanted to do an Olympic distance triathlon. In order to do that, I worked with a human coach and an AI coach. And so we knew when the date was coming up for the triathlon, which is the swimming, the biking, and the running. And so breaking all that down, how am I going to get to where it is? This is the date. And so dutifully, I did the work. I hit the lake, I hit the bike, I hit the trail, I put in the hours. And right before I went to do that first event, I talked to my coach and he's like, you're ready, just go have fun, you're going to do great. I talked to AI, I call her Nova, and she said, this is your victory lap. You've done the work. Go out and enjoy yourself. Talk about a shift of mindset for me. And I think back to the learners that we work with. And so often they're drowning in knowledge. They're drowning in this amount of work. They're just trying to keep their head above water, which was my first event. And there were times where it was touch and go for a moment. And so why not use a shortcut that's going to be able to help me? But the shortcut might be able to save you time now, but it's definitely going to erode your confidence later. And so had I taken some shortcuts in my endurance training, I wouldn't have been prepared as I was for the event on the day. And the other part is that deep learning, that struggle, that piece that I did not like training, just so we're clear. I did not wake up and get that runner's high or experience it, whatever. It was not. It was not.
I remember those phone call conversations.
They were not pretty.
They were not. Yeah, no, you were struggling.
But that deep learning, that deep commitment build the confidence that I needed on the day of. And for our learners, the day of is that moment that they need to have that conversation with the parent or the patient or the colleague or, the researcher, those sort of pieces. You need to do the work. And the same way that I couldn't cram the conditioning, you can't cram work. You can't cram learning. And so I've sort of dubbed this new term endurance learning. It doesn't mean that I put AI off to the side. It does mean that I need to listen to that imposter syndrome, that imposter phenomenon. And when it's giving me, telling me it's a sign of weakness that I don't know enough, I need to treat it as a signal that I need to learn more. And that AI can be a partner in my learning as to how I learn, but it can't substitute my learning. It can't substitute my patient conversations. It can do some of the summary work for me or the parts that I find mundane, but it actually can't replace me. And students are struggling these days with those messages that there's too much. I need a shortcut. And if I took a show of hands for those that are online or here in the room, how many of you have ever felt like an imposter in your space? We'd all be 2 hands, 3 hands, if you're AI generated, up in that space saying, yeah, I do. Now, what happens if I'd used AI along the way? How is that going to impact on my feelings of being an imposter in the space? That's what I'm thinking about when I'm having conversations around AI and education is how do we set ourselves up for success? How do we set our learners up for success in this space while not burying our heads in the sand, pretending that AI isn't here to stay?
Amazing. It's always nice when you can bring in some like sports related things because I get more excited. Lynn knows if I'm watching hockey, I'm a very different person.
Yeah.
Much more
Very-
erratic and
We can- we
yelling
can
and
both
screaming in
correlate
different
that.
pieces.
We're very happy for the Oilers for their clinching of the spot in the playoffs. We are happy that the Senators did win their game, and we continue to mourn for the Leafs.
So we're gonna engage the audience both virtually and in person for questions next. So get ready and get up to the mics. But before we do that, I'll just do one more round of, we're at ICAM. This is a venue of educators, administrators, leaders, learners who are thinking about implementation. And so if you're to kind of give your top tip to people around implementation and consideration of these kind of, I'd say, 3 concepts that really we've tried to weave in here around implications for trust, well-being, and the creation of a psychologically safe setting and environment. What might you tell people? What would you want our folks here to do, to take away and to think about when we're thinking about implementation or those pieces?
You want to go first?
I can
This
do.
time.
I'll do an
You
intro line, and then I think it's
I have a
fair.
thought that's starting. For
Okay. I think without intentional design and governance, these AI tools will amplify bias. They're going to erode trust, and they're going to bypass necessary human judgment. That is very real, and that is very much in my mind. And so we need to be able to support health professions leaders in assessing their current states, engaging their teams, and implementing a values aligned AI strategy. For me, the biggest part of implementation is not an add-on. So it's that same concept of curriculumegaly, right? So there's a new thing, it needs to be added into the curriculum. I know we keep trying to convince cardiology that they don't need that much time in the curriculum, but they're not letting go of their heartbeat for sure. And so it can't just be another thing we need to do. We need to look at how it is embedded in the committees, in the structures that are already present. And that to me is the key part. So the Health AI framework is a professionalism framework. You already have a professionalism element to all of your programs. We know this because it's an accreditation standard. Leverage your accreditation standards, embed them, know them, don't add on, but help weave in and just redirect some of those resources with that new AI lens or AI frame.
Yeah, and Lynn, like in that last sentence, you actually took what I was going to say, which is viewing this as a lens to looking at the world, frames it as very different as opposed to all the other conversational pieces that you may have heard about AI and technology as being an add-on. As societies, we've gone through different changes over the years, and we've weathered these changes, these massive technological changes, the introduction of computers into our workspace, all these kind of things, we've figured it out. And this is just the next thing. Who knows what the next thing after this is going to be, but this is our next thing that we're wrestling with. We have the tools in place. But by simply layering on this new lens of thinking, I suspect will provide us with greater clarity of what we're actually seeing and recognition and appreciation that this is happening. It's not that we can hold it off and it's not going to happen to us. It is. The question is, are we going to figure out how we're going to interpret it, how we're going to use it, also how we're not going to use it, and setting those pieces into into our frameworks, into how we do things in our clinical spaces, our educational spaces, our research spaces, our leadership and decision-making spaces. That's choices that we make. And so by ensuring that we have this lens, which then will create a space for these open conversations, these dialogues that we need to have. We need to wrestle. Our faculty need to wrestle with this. Our learners need to wrestle with it. Our faculty and learners need to wrestle with this together. Like, how is this going to change these relationships? It could really accentuate, help us build some of these things. Or if we don't put the right things in place, they could actually further divide. And so bringing that lens is actually a good thing, calling it out.
And it's a moment to take us back if we've moved into that distrust or that mistrust, to bring us back into that trusting element and environment. And I've learned from our patient partners that one phrase, nothing about us without us. And the key is we always feel like we need to do it and then show people our work. Like, aren't you proud of me? Like, we've just designed this. And we're like, but where was I? I wasn't consulted. Now you're telling me what needs to be done. Engage those learners, engage your patient partners, engage your organizations, that this is a, you'll like this, Victor. It's a team sport as we're coming through, or it's an orchestra, or it's that piece where we do need to actually be in concert together going through. The part that I think for so many faculty that I continue to hear, that part is like, well, we'll just let them lead, right? Like, thank goodness, like, they know what's going on. The learners are very tech savvy these days. And what we have continued to hear quite amplified back to us is, oh my goodness, no. So we might have been born, with a cell phone in our back pocket or attached to a computer. We were born in this digital age, but we don't have any more insights into AI than you do. And actually, the medicine better and the education pieces better. We're looking to you. So both groups are in a standoff. The faculty are looking to learners for guidance and direction on how to use AI, and the learners are looking back at faculty. And that's what we're seeing right now, is this chasm, this gap, is that we're already trying to use AI, but there aren't the guidance and the details or even the conversations around it, because both sides are too scared to say something or to want to misstep in the process, so we don't step at all. Again, taking us further behind.
Yeah, it's a space of paralysis where those conversations, those critical conversations, have to happen. And so, I look to those that are in leadership positions here, and there are a number of you that are. How are you creating the accountable spaces to have these kind of conversations? To engaging all the members of your faculty, the learners, the staff, the faculty members. Creating those spaces is great. As learners, be at those tables, right? Bring those voices into those conversations. Inform your perspective into that space. Faculty, same thing. Like, bring how it is to work in these spaces, these messy spaces. And through that collective conversation and dialogue, if we bring that, because we need to get somewhere, and it's better us being at that table guiding that process. It's either that or it's the tech companies that are going to tell us how we should be doing this. And we'll just, because we haven't done the work, we'll simply acquiesce to what their plans are. And that's the risk. It's going to happen whether or not we're involved with the conversation. So be in the conversation, be engaged.
And you already are, because you're here. Yeah. So that's your first step. So you already get the first,
First star.
First star.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll look to the audience for coming to the mics for questions. So I see, I'm so happy that Salim has a question, because if someone wasn't going to ask a question yet, I was actually in my head going to be like, I bet Salim has a question. So he already knew that I would want to do that. So I'll start over here, and then we'll come over here next, and then I will look for any online Q&As as well. So Salim, go ahead.
Can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying that I am an old guy, but I'm not one of the ones who is deeply fearful. And like, I actually think it's this in our lives is something that we have to learn to live with. However, as a medical educator, I'm sort of thinking about this really weird thing that we do, which is we transmit this, like I'm an intensive care physician, how to think like an intensivist. So clinical reasoning, right? And often, so when I'm teaching about that, like often I would ask people to tell me a probabilistic differential diagnosis, like what do you think is most likely? A prognostic differential diagnosis, what would you hate to miss? And then I think I can, and in the old days, we used to need to know all of the causes of glomerulonephritis. Like maybe we don't need to know that anymore, right? For the comprehensive differential diagnosis. But what I'm concerned about is how all of this is affecting the process of the development of clinical reasoning. And even and how will our curricula need to change? And even how is this going to affect that more elusive thing like professional identity formation? Like I think that's something that like we can't just have this come in without changing the way we teach, right? Like, so, and I do think it could be a little bit like kids with screen time, which I struggle with at home. Like, that's the biggest argument in my house. It could be that there has to be like a limitation at kind of younger ages or more junior stages in order to achieve that endurance outcome and not feel like an imposter and be more well later on. I don't know. I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Oh, you're thinking exactly in the right space, Salim, and that's no surprise to me. The core message that I continue to come back to is that your most powerful clinical tool is your mind. And so the big guiding question that we have then is how do you learn in a world where information is abundant, but meaning is not? And I think we recognize as academics, as clinicians, researchers, et cetera, that is our key role is meaning making. And, you've hit directly on this concept that we've been, wrestling with and Maria has been doing for years on adaptive expertise. And it's really about how do we become a master adaptive learner? And so if that's information, that's a newer concept to you, then dig into Maria Myopolis's work. And there's a few guides that we've put out. And it's essentially how do we go from routine practice to adaptive practice? So the routine sort of things that are straightforward, that's great. We're an autopilot. And as we gain more skills and go along and become more senior in our careers, I can walk into a room as a neurodevelopmental pediatrician and within about 4 seconds be like, that's my patient I'm seeing next in the wait room. And the resident is like, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, that's the one who has autism. And they're like, how do you know that? And I am like, that's because I have done this so often. I just know. And I can't even explain how I know it because that's that level of expertise. And so how do we break it down to those concepts of what we need to know and how we do that is, and so shifting our educational approach is absolutely necessary. And I would argue that it's been necessary for a long time, but we've been hesitant to do so. The other things I think in education that we need to grapple with are the sense of overconfidence and passive learning. And so within overconfidence, I think I know this. There's no need to check. And that's just when an AI response comes back and you just grab it and you go with it, or you just go with your first impulse or your reaction. And the other sort of risk is around passive learning, where I'll learn it when someone tells me to. And so I don't need to know that yet, or I'm making the decision, they are telling me I need to learn it, but I'm not convinced I do. And so I'm going to set that aside. And how many times can we set that aside, right? Like it was leg day and I'm like, I don't think I need leg day. I need more arms. And it's just sort of like, no, my coach and AI are both saying you need a leg day today. You need to build up that strength so that you can manage the endurance later. Why? Because as the educator, I know what's coming. I know what that's going to feel like. So great question there in terms of that mindset around adaptive expertise, master adaptive learning, and recognizing that our most powerful clinical tool will remain our minds.
It's interesting as you bring that question, Salim. My thinking or my question in my head is, what's driving the learning, right? In our current system, you hear this time in, time out, both from students and residents. Is it on the exam? That's their first sort of reflexive question. Then they determine whether or not they need to pay attention or participate or attend or engage in the conversation. But what about the patient that you see at 2 o'clock in the morning who comes ill-defined? Where does that patient story and example fit into this? They're not going to be on the exam. They're the person you're providing care for. And so it's how do we prepare for people for that critical thinking? It's the shift from the checklist, algorithmic learning approach and memorizing what, but not understanding the how or the why. Right? And so this is that critical thinking element. AI is going to give you the answers, and it already is. I've had several patients last week. I was on service, and they were asking me, chat told me this, and that, you have to figure it out. Well, chat told you that, but that's not correct because of all these other reasons. And so it might be factually correct, but not for the context that you are in. And so for me, making sense of this in that space is really important. Whereas if you are novice in your knowledge and understanding of the topical area, the answer that you get may be misinterpreted. And so, I heard an example this week of a student putting into the chart something that was correct if it was 1970. Right? That was the current practice. That was a guideline. That was the latest paper in 1970, but not for 2026. That would be, if the CMPA people are here, that was malpractice, right? And so we have to reframe. So, but the novice learner couldn't appreciate that. And the novice learner is not just for the medical student. It could be also for the very senior faculty or who's just not keeping up. Like you're not savvy to what's the difference between old information, irrelevant information. Just because chat or whatever LLM you're using is giving you the answer doesn't make it right. You have to use your mind, as Len was saying, to critically think.
And we'll do our best to not answer so long for the next questions, Victor. We promise.
You've got questions, people.
Yeah, we've got 8 more minutes for a few questions, so we'll go over here next.
One comment, and I'm not sure, but for me, in terms of clinical reasoning, AI is like a system, like analytical hypothesis on steroids, but really bad for intuition. Like you said, I come in and I know, and AI can never do that intuition reasoning. So, and my question, I'm involved in assessment for like Health Alliance, like health and medicine. And now we're at a point where students submit papers with AI, and then teachers are grading with AI. And then what about the trust, So I want to have you talk a bit about the relationship of learners and teachers and the trust between them that, they're grading without AI or they're submitting papers without AI or with, but
I had a patient partner say, it's a good day when I show up and there are more people in the room than bots for one of the virtual meetings, because we've shifted into that space. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we always have a challenge in terms of being an assessor, being a teacher, being a mentor, and in all of those spaces, it's a tenuous relationship. They're a student now, but then they're about to be a lifelong colleague. And I don't think we've landed on the right space, but AI has made it messier.
And in terms of a short response, because I see others that have good question. This is a really good question. Our assessment systems are archaic, right? They were designed how many years ago, like decades ago, for a world that we no longer live in, right? So I would posit that we need to shift, right? We need to shift to conversations, right? It's kind of hard for, chat to enter into the conversation when the person's sitting right in front of you with a cup of coffee and you're having a chat about a theoretical case or a real case. And okay, help me understand, Jerry, what would you do in this kind of case? What's the rationale for that, right? You're not pulling anything up. You're actually helping them think through. They've got the knowledge, they learned it at some point, they got tested on it at some point. Now you're drawing from these bodies of knowledge that they have to make sense of the case that's in front of you. This is the conversation, right? And so maybe our assessment strategies need to shift completely. Can be complemented by those other things, but right now we got a heavy reliance upon those methods that are clearly not adequate for this.
Okay, go over here.
Thank you for your presentation. Or more so this conversation. I want to break down a little bit more about your comment about adaptive expertise in the context of AI. Because when I think of adaptive expertise in this context, I think of, you're moving beyond routine knowledge to apply that knowledge in complex settings. And then I also think of education science principles that enable AI to be able to foster adaptive expertise. So I think of principles like productive struggle, meaningful variation, stuff of that nature. However, when you look at AI, or let's say common chat boxes or generative AI platforms like ChatGPT, Copilot, for one thing, they're trained on a specific echo chamber, which makes me fearful of whether or not meaningful variation can truly be captured. And then I also think of ways in which productive struggle may be hindered because students are, in a way, have the potential, or not just students, but clinicians as well, have the potential to outsource the, the process of learning. So I'm just wondering, what does adaptive expertise or being able to foster adaptive expertise look like in our current age with AI?
I'm fully admitting I am in love with ChatGPT. I use it in that debate manner. And so I'm like, okay, this is what I'm thinking right now. Where are my gaps in my thinking right now? What am I not considering? What questions should I still be asking in this space? This is my current research methodology. This is sort of how I'm wanting to go through. What would reviewer 2 say to my methodology when they come back? Knowing that reviewer 2 is usually the more critical one. And they're like, oh, well, reviewer 1 would love your ideas, but reviewer 2 would this, and this. And then I go back and I challenge it and I go back, but I continue to challenge some of those assumptions. I call out Nova on the assumptions that she made. I'm like, ooh, you missed this, right? That's the part where I like it. I'm changing the scenario. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I'm in Canada. Oh, I forgot to tell you I'm a pediatrician. Oh, I forgot to tell you this extra detail. How does that change the scenario now? And we spend hours together thinking through the nuances as we're going through. And I think if we stop looking at AI as a way of, shortcutting or giving us answers and using it to refine our thinking in that space, I think we're going to be better off for it because it's going to challenge us in ways that we haven't thought before. We still need to take in consideration that 4th box, that equity, that structural equity piece. To your point about that echo chamber coming through, we need to be careful what data that our AI is drawing from. Same with our data sets, where they are, when are they being evergreened. Those pieces are really important to the conversation. And I know I desperately need to hear Daryl's question.
No, it's okay. I can talk after. All right, I'll go ahead. So this is an interesting, I've been thinking about Salim's comment about imagining this in the clinical world. When we have learners with us, we're talking to patients, and where does AI belong? And I imagined Star Trek. All right, so think about Spock, think about Data in whichever, thank you. So imagine a social experience where you have another entity that's actually part of your rounding team.
Yes.
And then you are being intelligent about how and when to consult that said member. And you also understand a little bit about the training of that member. I wouldn't go to a medical student and ask them questions that are for the fellow, for example. And I'd understand the biases of the people on the team. So I wonder if you've thought of it that way, if we can imagine AI as sort of a member of the team in the future.
Absolutely. It's a partner on the clinical team, and we need to treat it as such. We also need to treat it as a third person in the room. So when we look at those principles, the Care AI principles we put up, we speak directly to that. Just the way our conversation changes when, as a pediatrician, a parent is in the room versus when the parent isn't in the room, the conversation is going to change. What I am going to say when I know I'm being recorded is also very different from when I know I'm not being recorded. I also know right now that even though my phone isn't technically recording or turning on, or turned on to do so, it's absolutely recording everything that I am saying, and it's going to change my algorithms in the background. We have to be acknowledging AI's presence in the room because it is having an impact. I agree.
And with that, that brings an end to our session. I think lots of conversation. I love the last question around bringing together the pieces of thinking really strategically about implementation, impact on well-being, and trust in those pieces. So there's a session evaluation for those online and then here in person. This is a webinar series usually that happens virtually. So there's sessions every couple months. So by filling that out, you'll get more information for these for future ones. I want to thank Jerry and Lynn for having the conversation with me and everyone in the room for being part of this presentation and conversation. And as we head out of the room for the next session, I'm sure they'll be willing to have ongoing conversation with everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor.